Gimena Sanchez with the Washington office on Latin America. Very pleased to be with you here today to talk about a very important issue that has surfaced for us here, especially in Washington, which is the discussion surrounding the Alcântara space base in Maranhão in Brazil. As you all know, in the past year or more, the relationship between Trump and Bolsonaro has just been very tight. And among the different things that are discussed, including potential free trade agreement, we have the expansion of this space base, which is highly problematic. And we will hear more from our panelists today about that. So today, I'm extremely pleased to present to you Sean Mitchell, who will be presenting us with a history of the Alcântara space base in the state of Maranhão. Mr. Mitchell is the co-editor of various books, but also the author of a recent book on the topic, which I recommend everyone read. I just finished it and it's absolutely excellent, called Constellations of Inequality, Space, Race, and Utopia in Brazil. He's done research in Maranhão and has followed this issue very closely for many, many years. So we really appreciate having his expertise and academic knowledge on this. After Sean, we will hear from Davi Pereira, a Quilombola activist from the territory of Itamataua, Alcântara, who has been involved in the struggle for his community's land rights for over 15 years. Mr. Pereira is currently at the Rappaport Center for Human Rights and Justice, and he is a PhD student with the Latin American Studies Department at the University of Texas. He will be talking about the recent legal and political actions that Quilombola communities and their allies are taking to defend territorial rights in Alcântara. Then we will be followed by Juliana Moraes, who's the executive director of the Washington, Brazil office, which is part of the US Network for Democracy in Brazil, who is also co-sponsoring today's event. She will provide some commentary on different actions that have been taken by activists and academics to advance human rights in Brazil, and also the Washington, Brazil office's congressional advocacy efforts that she's been leading. So with that, I forgot to mention, we will be taking questions via Twitter. So what you do is you have to tweet with the hashtag WOLA Brazil. And at the end, we will try to get to as many of those as we can. And also for folks who want translation, to please go down to the bottom of the page where it says interpretation. The first part is going to be in English and the second part is going to be in Portuguese. And we are very fortunate to have translation both ways. So with that, we will start with Professor Mitchell. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Gimena, for that nice introduction. Wonderful you read Constellations of Inequality, my book about Alcântara, which is great. And I should say, my internet is all messed up for some reason. You froze for part of that. So I hope, but I don't think that was your fault. It's my internet's been freezing intermittently for the last hour. So hopefully this is clear. Of all days for my internet suddenly to go, this is an unfortunate one, but hopefully things are okay. So it's great to be here. Thank you, Juliana and Davi. Thank you to all who are listening. It's being translated, so I think para o público que está no Brasil, que é os português falantes, obrigado a vocês também. So yeah, I'm an anthropologist from the United States at Rutgers University in Newark. I've been doing research in Alcântara for almost 20 years. I wrote my doctoral dissertation and a book about Alcântara. And while I've moved on to do other research projects, many things keep bringing me back to Alcântara, including my love for an incredible place and many people there. But also as a citizen of the US, my responsibility, given the really dangerous deal that Trump and Bolsonaro have signed, and that's going to have an enormous impact. So a bit about the place. It's a peninsula. I'll show a map later in Maranhão, Brazil, which is right on the border between Brazil's northeast and the Amazon. Oh, thank you, Gimena. It's home both to Brazil's main spaceport and to many Afro-Brazilian Quilombo communities. I only have a short presentation slot here, so in that brief time, I'll do my best to explain to you what it's important to know about Alcântara, its history, and this deal between Trump and Bolsonaro, and why it should be opposed by people who care about human rights, and why we who are US citizens should care about it. So first, just some basic stuff. Quilombo, historically in Brazil, refers to free communities of once enslaved African-descended people, often formed through escape from slavery. So in the region where Alcântara is, the general area, the reports from authorities from like 1702 about quilombos that had existed for years previous. So that's more than 300 years ago that there, in this region, there are reports of quilombos. But in the area of Alcântara, enslavement of African-descended people really began on a massive scale with the rise of cotton in the region. And that begins like right around the middle of the 18th century and really gets going, interestingly, with the American Revolution, when cotton prices go way up on world markets. England is industrializing with cotton. And from like 1776 to 1820, there's a massive cotton boom. And over that period, some 83,000 people are forcibly brought from Africa to Maranhão. Just that, you know, barely more than 50 years. So much so that on the eve of Brazil's independence from the Portuguese Empire in 1822, Maranhão was the Brazilian province with the highest percentage of its population enslaved, 55%. The famous Brazilian historian Caio Prado Jr. Remarked, white cotton turned Maranhão black. But here's what's crucial. Around 1820, or 1818 or so, that cotton economy starts to decline. And there's, on a massive scale, people who were enslaved are able to, in various ways, leave plantations and form free communities. And so this is a region where there's a large-scale formation of free Black communities in a slave society. Brazil did not abolish slavery until 1888, the last place in the Western Hemisphere to do so. But by the time abolition comes along, Alcântara, this peninsula, is largely populated by free Black communities engaged in a form of sustainable, rotating agriculture, fishing, and gathering, which in many ways continues to this day. So, you know what, Matthew, if you don't mind bringing up the slides quickly, I could just bring us to the place rapidly. Awesome, thank you. So this first slide, I'll come back. That's a map, which I'll come back to. So why don't you just go to the next slide. Here you see some of the remnants of that opulence from the slave labor generated opulence during this period of cotton. If you can go to the next slide. And here you see some of the ruins where people are like planting banana trees. You see the vitality amid the ruins of this once society based on slave labor. And if you can go to the next slide. And here, very briefly, this is an old photo from 2004 that I took of Mamuna, which is a quilombo, the one that is closest to the spaceport, which I will soon talk about, which is under threat of expropriation. And interestingly, if you go there today, it looks very different. There are electrical wires because of a rural electrification program in Brazil in 2006, which is important. These people, oh, don't go to this one yet, who live here, they you know, want to be able to have the land that they, you know, have a constitutional right to, you know, but they also want technology and education, and, you know, these things are not incompatible in any way. So, all right, if you can close the images and I'll continue. And I'm just trying to pack a lot into 15 minutes here. I know it's already a lot of history, it's a little bit more, but I'll try and get through the important stuff. Brazil is ruled by a military regime from 1964 to 85, of course, a regime that came to power with a US-sponsored coup. And at the end of that military regime, there's a constituent assembly which actually in 1988, which is exactly 100 years after the abolition of slavery in Brazil. And social movements are emerging from this period of repression, including many Black Brazilian movements. And social movements and Afro-Brazilian movements are able to get numerous things in the new constitution, including a crucial clause that requires that the state grant land rights to Gimena Sanchez das Comunidades dos Quilombos, so to these Quilombo-descended communities. Now, this is crucial because these are mostly places that never had land title, right? They were living, in many ways, in kind of under, all kinds of racist prohibitions. And so suddenly people have the opportunity for constitutionally mandated land title. And the communities in Alcântara have been recognized by Brazil's federal government as Quilombos since 2004, but have not received land title for a variety of political reasons, which I probably won't have time to get into, but it may be in the questions. So let's see, more history in this brief presentation. The spaceport. Brazil has a space program since 1961. This was in the Cold War when the United States and the USSR were competing around space programs. In 1980, under the military regime, a vast area was expropriated in Alcântara by decree for the construction of this spaceport. The Quilombolas in the area were at that time supported by a rural labor union, and there was a lot of conflict over the size of land parcels that expropriated communities would receive. There was really a lot of deception, and communities were in significant ways screwed over in that deal. They didn't get enough land. Families were given individual plots where it was impossible to maintain the kind of collective rotating agriculture that is traditional and sustainable in the region. People were moved, about 312 families were forcibly removed from their seaside homes into these government-built agrovillas, which actually, if Matthew, if you don't mind pulling up the picture, the next slide is of an agrovilla. And, in those agrovillas, they were made dependent on sporadic wage labor that were available, right? They didn't have the same kind of access to fishing and to traditional forms of farming and to the many products of the forest that people rely on. And, I spent a lot of time in these communities. The difference is palpable. When you go to the traditional quilombos and people, it's like there's all kinds of fruits and, an abundance of fish, and people talk about that abundance. And, in the agrovillas, people are scrambling instead for money. And in conditions in which it's very, very difficult to come by that money. I mean, Maranhão is the Brazilian state with the highest levels of poverty in all Brazil. So it's not an easy place to come by that kind of money. So let's see, if you can skip to the next slide to talk about the base. So this base was built. It occupies almost 9,000 hectares. And you can see, I don't think I can move my own. Can you see my mouse arrow pointing on this? No, okay, so I can't point at things. But you can see the area on the bottom right is with the 1, 2, and 3 in them, which are areas of the base, is the existing spaceport. But that's almost 9,000 hectares with 2 launch pads, which I don't have time to tell you about those launch pads. They all have interesting histories that I've written about. But both are mostly inactive, and the reason that they're inactive is because of the abandonment of funding for science and technology by the Brazilian government. But that base is there. The area above it is an area that's slated for expropriation under the current plan, and the whole area that's in white is area that's recognized as Quilombo territory by the government. So just a few more minutes. I now want to explain the accord and why it matters. So you can take out the slides, Matthew. So last year, Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro signed a technology safeguards accord for the use of US space technology in Brazil. The accord, which by the way, a similar one was signed but not ratified by Brazil's Congress in 2000, and that they generated kind of similar opposition for a lot of reasons. And in Brazil, that opposition includes because it imposes limits on the development of Brazil's space program, on Brazilian sovereignty, because of the specter of militarization in the region. Those are topics I won't get into here, but they're very important in the debates in Brazil. But the fact that should concern people in the United States in particular is how this accord is implicated in an illegal land grab of the protected Quilombo land along the coast of Alcântara that I showed you on that map. When the accord was being negotiated, the Bolsonaro government made repeated promises, explicit promises, that there would be no expropriation of additional land because 9,000 hectares is already available, right? None is technically necessary. Yet as soon as the accord was ratified by Brazil's Congress, the government released plans for this illegal land grab of additional land up Alcântara's coast, which is home to about 800 Quilombo families with constitutionally guaranteed land rights. So to sum that part up, just a few more minutes, Alcântara's Quilombolas have a constitutional right to their land. They live in many ways a very decent and sustainable life on the edge of the Amazon forest. And those of us here in the United States should forcefully oppose the US role in the planned illegal land grab there. Now, just to make one thing very, very clear, this is not a story of Quilombolas versus development. That is the wrong way to frame this story. People are not against development. They're not against the space program. I talk to people in Alcântara all the time. In fact, if anyone's against development, it is the Brazilian federal government itself. The Bolsonaro government, in its budget for 2021, has completely eliminated the research budget for INPE. That's Brazil's main civilian space research organization, right? So this is a government, the Bolsonaro government and its predecessor government of Michel Temer, that are very hostile to any kind of investment in science technology. This is not a story of Quilombo residents kind of blocking development. In fact, there are 9,000 hectares. The United States, the vast Spaceport America constructed in New Mexico is only a little more than 7,000 hectares. SpaceX and Blue Origin, they launch their rockets from very small parcels. There's no technical reason for the Brazilian space program to require more land. Rather, the Trump administration has signed a deal that will result in this illegal theft of constitutionally protected Quilombo communities for political reasons, right? And by a Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, who has said that people who live in Quilombo communities, and this is a quote, aren't fit to procreate. That's a quote from the president of Brazil. So we who are concerned with human rights in the US should repudiate this disastrous accord. Sorry if I took a few extra minutes. I'll give it up to Davi, and I look forward to any discussion.
No, excellent. Thank you once again. And here is the cover of your book, which I think everybody should read. Let's go on to David, and then we will hopefully have more time to speak further.
Okay, thank you, Shan, and thank you for your disponibility to support the struggle of Alcântara. Thank you, Gimena and Juliana, for opening this space for discussion. I only speak in Portuguese because it'll be more easy to explain myself. So, eu gostaria de começar por onde o Shan terminou, que se tem alguém contra o processo, o projeto espacial brasileiro, e quem está boicotando só pode ser o Estado brasileiro. Porque quem assina a SCT da forma que o Brasil assinou, ele está abrindo mão do seu próprio projeto de autonomia e de tecnologia. Então, nós, quilombolas, não podemos arcar com o ônus dessas acusações. É a primeira questão. A segunda questão que eu gostaria de colocar é que esse problema de Alcântara está para além desse desgoverno atual que nós temos no Brasil. Alcântara poderia já ser titulado em 2008, mas o Partido dos Trabalhadores, que era considerado por nós um partido progressista e que chegou a ter, o presidente Lula e a presidente Dilma chegaram a ter mais de 90% dos votos das comunidades quilombola nas 3 eleições nas 4 eleições que o Partido dos Trabalhadores foi eleito, mas foi o presidente Lula que em 2008 se recusou a assinar a titulação de Alcântara, e ele tinha como ministra da Casa Civil a Dilma, que foi muito truculenta com relação às questões de Alcântara. Então, o que eu quero dizer é que, independente de ser esquerda ou direita, né, os interesses econômicos se sobrepõem sobre o direito das comunidades quilombolas de Alcântara. Isso, o Estado brasileiro, as pessoas que ocupam a presidência da República, tanto faz ser de esquerda ou ser de direita, o planejamento é seguir com esse tipo de desenvolvimento, né? E nós em Alcântara, a luta de Alcântara já é travada há 40 anos, né? E essas formas de organizar, a Alcântara tem algumas formas organizativas, que tem o movimento dos atingidos pela base, o MAB, o movimento de mulheres quilombolas de Alcântara, o MONTRA, o Sindicato de Trabalhadores Rurais de Alcântara, e também tem a Associação dos Territórios Étnicos de Alcântara. E essas formas organizativas têm tentado resistir a esses processos. E uma das possibilidades que a gente encontrou foi tornar o caso de Alcântara internacional, né? Trazer para a esfera, para a seara da disputa internacional. Então, um dos caminhos que nós encontramos primeiro foi levar a comissão da Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos, né? Então, o caso de Alcântara está mais de 10 anos da Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos. A primeira decisão, a primeira audiência que nós tivemos foi em 2008, e a Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos recomendou que o Estado brasileiro cumprisse com a obrigação constitucional de titulação das comunidades, mas o Estado se recusou. Então, nós decidimos também, estrategicamente, avançar com outra ação na Organização Internacional do Trabalho, porque Alcântara é um caso singular. É o primeiro caso no Brasil onde a gente provoca a Organização Internacional de Direito do Trabalho a expandir o direito da Convenção 69 para populações quilombolas, para afrodescendentes do Brasil. Então, essa provocação foi feita ainda lá em 2010, e o ano passado nós fizemos uma reclamação oficial e foi admitida pela OIT. Então, nós estamos movendo 2 ações contra o Estado brasileiro por crime de direitos humanos em Alcântara. O Chan já relatou os deslocamentos que houve na década de 80. Alcântara é um município brasileiro com a maior concentração de comunidades quilombolas. São 219 comunidades quilombolas. Não é o maior território. Ele é o 3º maior território. Você tem um território no Pará, que é o Ximiná, e o território Calunga, em Goiás, que são, em termos de tamanho, maiores. Mas em número de comunidades, Alcântara é o maior território quilombola em número de comunidades do Brasil. Então, a nossa estratégia, nós sabemos que as esferas internacionais elas não podem, de fato, ter o poder de obrigar o Estado brasileiro a titular, a cumprir com a sua obrigação, que nem deveria, mas a nossa estratégia é envergonhar o Estado brasileiro, causar constrangimento ao Estado brasileiro por não cumprir suas obrigações. Esses passos que nós estamos aqui travando a luta, nós poderíamos estar utilizando para desenvolvimento territorial, concentrando energias para o desenvolvimento das comunidades, mas nós temos que fazer enfrentamento ao Estado que é irresponsável, um Estado racista, que é o Estado brasileiro, por não cumprir suas obrigações, que é um direito básico. Território é um direito fundamental, portanto, inegociável. E essa é a mensagem para o Estado brasileiro, seja lá quem esteja controlando o Estado brasileiro. Obviamente que depois que o Bolsonaro assumiu a presidência da República, ficou muito mais difícil, porque ele é abertamente racista. As declarações deles sobre processo de titulação quilombola foram muito evidentes antes dele ser, inclusive, presidente. Então, ele está executando a agenda dele, e parte dessa agenda passa por não respeitar direitos fundamentais garantidos na Constituição, né? E, por outro lado, nós estamos tentando, nessa tentativa de uma articulação internacional, porque, ao nosso ponto de ver em Alcântara, essa questão só pode ser... o conflito é maior que Alcântara, mas não pode estar localizado dentro das comunidades. Então, por isso, é importante esse espaço como ele, importante a contribuição da Juliana, do Shen, a gente já conta com ele aí há bastante tempo, da Gimena. Então, essa rede que a gente está tentando construir para fora é para também dar a possibilidade da sociedade americana saber o que está acontecendo, porque o Estado brasileiro ele se nega, historicamente, a dialogar com as comunidades quilombolas. Nós somos ignorados. Então, o Estado brasileiro, antes da assinatura do Acordo de Salvaguarda Tecnológico, nós procuramos, o Estado brasileiro, nós procuramos o Poder Legislativo para conversar, porque esse é um processo que não pode ser resolvido antes de resolver as demandas territoriais. Matthew, if you could put my first slide, please. Então, não pode ficar... esse aqui é o mapa dos territórios. Nós estamos falando desse território em verde mais escuro, né? Essa é a área do decreto, que foi desapropriada em 80, 52 mais 10 em 90, nos anos 90 são 62 mil hectares. Essa aqui é o território como todo. Aqui fica o segundo território, Itamatati, e mais uma da Ilha do Cajual. Next. Então, esse aqui é onde o Chan estava mostrando onde fica o CLA, o Centro de Lançamento de Fato, e o que eles querem avançar é sobre essa região. Aqui são a região aqui é o Oceano Atlântico, como é uma península que avança sobre o Oceano Atlântico, circundada por duas baías, de São Marcos e de Cumã. Se o Estado brasileiro ocupar esses 12 mil hectares nessa região, vai provocar também insegurança alimentar, né? Porque quando, no primeiro processo de deslocamento dessa região para cá, as comunidades que foram deslocadas passaram por um grande processo de crise alimentar, né? Então, essa área é fundamental para se manter o equilíbrio da segurança alimentar nas comunidades quilombolas. Next, please, Matthews. Então, se consolidar o projeto, então todas as pessoas que moram aqui serão realocadas possivelmente aqui para dentro. Então, você vai provocar uma pressão pelos recursos naturais que já quase são inexistentes, né? Então, você vai aumentar a pressão sobre esses recursos e você vai ter o risco das pessoas de Alcântara morrerem de fome, né? Porque fome e prisão e cadeia, as pessoas da comunidade de Alcântara descobriram depois do projeto espacial brasileiro, depois que esse projeto chegou. Então, a nossa preocupação, Matthew, is good. A nossa preocupação nesse momento é por manter as pessoas no lugar de suas casas, é pelo direito das pessoas poderem fazer seus cultos nos lugares, enterrar seus mortos nos seus cemitérios, ter o direito de planejar o futuro, porque o Estado brasileiro está tentando nos negar o direito da gente planejar nosso futuro, porque a insegurança territorial nos causa, né, esse prejuízo de você dormir hoje sem saber se amanhã você vai poder estar no mesmo lugar. O Estado brasileiro tem usado da tática do terror, como é o caso da Resolução 11, para poder tirar o sossego das pessoas. Então, não ter direito a usufruir do seu território também é um crime que esse Estado está cometendo. Então, não basta todo o processo violento que as comunidades têm passado por 40 anos, o Estado ainda quer, né, tirá-las. As poucas pessoas que estão localizadas no litoral, são 800 famílias, o Estado quer tirar de forma involuntária, desrespeitando a Constituição brasileira, desrespeitando o dispositivo internacional que o país é signatário. É um país que não tem nenhuma preocupação por direitos humanos básicos, né? E a pergunta que a gente faz é: que Estado é esse, né, que ameaça e tenta relocar seus cidadãos em pleno período de pandemia. Né? O Estado se pôs em estado de guerra contra as comunidades quilombolas de Alcântara. E a gente, eu vou parar por aqui e a gente pode discutir mais no debate. Obrigado.
A very alarming situation. Thank you so much, Davi. And of course, the United States should have absolutely no role in this. On that topic, Juliana, can you tell us a little bit about what actions have been taken and what can be done to help the Quilombola communities with this struggle?
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Sean and Davi, for all the knowledge that you both brought to us. And as you both mentioned, it's really important to have this network, to be, connecting with the struggle in Brazil and be dealing with organizations like WOLA, like the US Network for Democracy in Brazil, and many others that have been denouncing and bringing awareness to all of these violations to human rights and violations to basic environmental rights that are saved in our constitution in Brazil. So on this case, I wanted to say that, along these many organizations, we've been able to articulate with Congress members the inclusion of an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which approves the budget for the US. So it's one phrase, one line, one paragraph there, section 1290, that brings up the importance, like Gimena was saying, the US shouldn't be, the US taxpayers' money shouldn't be invested in this forced relocation, in this push for completely unsustainable, what they are claiming to be development, but as we've seen clearly with Davi and Sean's explanation, is not development what they're seeking. So this amendment has been approved in the House, and now it's under the going to be approved by the Senate, as we hope, and it will be, hopefully included in this final text. And along with this type of work, for example, this amendment, which we have been trying to reach out to folks at the House and the Senate Armed Services Committee, and most importantly, the chairman there in both committees, to make sure that they are aware of what it means to keep this amendment there, what it means to to push Bolsonaro to have a clear understanding of what this unsustainable and atrocious plans and projects to relocate Quilombola communities and indigenous communities, what it means to the country. And on that, it's like Davi was mentioning, I mean, I think we have seen a lot of similarities between what Bolsonaro has been doing and saying to what took place during the dictatorship, because they were openly racist, and in a structure, in a system here that are already extremely racist. We see that, like Bolsonaro said as soon as he was inaugurated, that he wouldn't allow one extra centimeter being allowed to territories. And as Sean was explaining, the Constitution of '88, all these land titles started coming out, and they're still like in process, it's not done. So we were struggling already with making sure that this process would be formalized at once, but it's a long process. And now we're falling back many years. And in terms of investment in science, like we're mentioning, it's not a matter of development. Brazil under Temer, and now even more under Bolsonaro, have seen a drop in science investment of 20 years. So we're investing now, which barely what we invested in the late 90s. So just to go back to what we have been doing on our end as advocates in the US, aside from these amendments that we've been pushing really hard, we have also a resolution that was introduced by Congressman Grijalva in 2019, September 2019, that has three paragraphs that talk about the Quilombola communities as a way that, as much as more signers join this resolution, more awareness will be brought and more, pressure will be made to the government of Brazil at this point. And aside from that, also through Congresswoman Deb Haaland, we saw in June a letter that she pushed forward pressure to the Brazilian Congress, asking for any discussion around the land grabbers law, which was, under development until June, and now is a little under the under the spotlight. They, pushing for this not to go through, for the land grabbers, the facilitation for deforestation or facilitation for mining, and this type of development that we're talking about now, that they don't go forward. And what we see since June is that this bill didn't go back into discussion so far. Of course, along with Holland, there has been a lot of pressure from the European Union and a number of other international groups. So, what we need to be watching is what this current administration is doing. And I agree with Davi, we need to be watching, we need to be standing in solidarity and supporting the resistance, no matter who is in power, to assure that human rights and environmental rights are protected. And, the most that we can weigh in, we will. And collaborate. And, we ask that, our partners in Washington, in the US Congress, are with us in this. And it's just sometimes so complex to follow everything that is happening. And this situation of forcibly relocating 800 families for something that is not necessary, we won't bring, the development that those people need. And so, this justification doesn't really match. So the importance of all of us working together is really good. And yeah, I think I'm gonna try to leave a little bit more of my time to Davi and Sean to go back to talking a bit more. And yeah, we need to be all together in this.
Wonderful, Juliana, and I encourage everyone to look at the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil's website, as well as the WOLA website, where we have more information about the different letters that have been done, and also this NDAA initiative, which will require U.S. citizens to really push their members of Congress to get passed on the Senate side. More than likely, this is going to move forward after the election and before January. So we've gotten a couple of questions, and I'm going to try to group them all and then give everybody a chance to respond. One is how the pandemic has affected the Quilombola families in Alcântara. Another is whether there are legislative initiatives in the Brazilian Congress to safeguard Quilombola communities. Also, does this space initiative even benefit Brazil? Brazil is ceding parts of its sovereignty to the US in the deal, but is it only really going to be for the US technology to use, or will Brazil actually have any access? And then another question I'm going to throw in, which I would like Professor Mitchell to expand on more, is, you talk in your book a lot about how this perception of inequality, this whole idea, conceptualization, and it seems to me that really is all just grounded in this racism or this caste system that exists not only in Brazil but in most of Latin America, where you end up getting this discourse similar to the one that Davi mentioned of this, they're against development and that kind of thing. So can you talk a bit more about how those perceptions in that society have been utilized to advance these economic interests? And let's go ahead and start with Professor Mitchell, and then we'll go to Davi.
Sure, thanks. And fortunately, my internet seems to be working again. It kicked me off Zoom twice while you're speaking, Juliana. Sorry, I'll check it out on YouTube, but it's working now. So in terms of legislative initiatives going on in Brazil, I'm not super up on the latest. I'm not necessarily the person to speak to what's going on in Congress in Brazil right now. And Davi, you're in Maranhão now, would undoubtedly speak better than I to the effects of the pandemic currently. So let me speak to what were the two other questions? One about kind of racism, and there was another. I'm sorry.
Whether or not this is actually going to benefit Brazil.
Yeah.
Feeding
So that,
Yeah.
So I'll tackle these both. They're interesting, both really important questions. On this first about how this benefit Brazil, it is fascinating to me. And I'm writing something about this now because if you look back in 2000, there was a very similar deal that was signed. It became a major issue in Brazil. It got opposition, very interestingly, from the left and from the right. And one of the big people who opposed it in Congress was none other than Jair Bolsonaro. Really interesting to see the flip at that point when he, I think, he doesn't have, I think, strong, I mean, his commitments are, let's just say, not really in the realm of economic policy. I don't think he has strong real preferences there, but so he was kind of taking this economically nationalist tack back then, and now, a position of subordination vis-a-vis the United States in kind of all domains. So there really is this flip. But the points that were raised then are still relevant now. The benefits that Brazil would receive are some money. There's no technology transfer in this accord. In fact, it limits the capacity of Brazil to kind of have its own autonomous space program. So this accord is consistent with a Brazilian government that would like to make some quick bucks, whatever the sacrifice to local communities, without significant investment in scientific and technological development. I mean, the idea is that the best place to launch satellites from in the world is the equator. So this is a very well located base. It's just south of the equator. It has a deep water port nearby. It's got ocean to the east. It's relatively stable weather patterns. Got all the things you want for a satellite launch base in terms of its location. So the idea is to make some money. And although there's enough existing land to do that, that land is a military and air force base, and the military doesn't want to give up its own space for this international profit-oriented project, and so it's the Quilombolas who are supposed to suffer because of that. In terms of the other question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a big part of the book, this inequality and its conceptualization. The Quilombo movement that has formed in the last couple of decades in Alcântara and other parts of Brazil has been really, really important. I mean, Brazil, like everywhere else in the Western Hemisphere, is formed through this process of settler colonialism and enslavement. There's deep racism, although the racism takes different forms in different places. And the Quilombo movement has also been, and we've talked to young people in the region, many of them very confidently identify as Quilombolas in a way that their parents are much more hesitant to have that kind of confidence in embracing this history and identity. So there has been a real transformation locally in this process of political mobilization that's gone on in the last couple decades in Alcântara.
Great. Davi, do you want to keep giving your opinions on the different questions? One of them was about the situation of the pandemic and how it's affecting, and the other is any congressional initiatives in Brazil, as well as anything else you'd like to comment on. You just got to unmute. Hi, we just need you to unmute, please. Unmute. Okay, thanks.
Quanto à pandemia, a Alcântara não tinha qualquer tipo de infraestrutura para enfrentar uma crise séria, né? Então, a única vantagem de Alcântara é estar perto da São Luís, que é cerca de 22, 23 quilômetros que você atravessa em barco. Então, as pessoas que geralmente, quando ficaram doentes, fica mais fácil você ir não é tão fácil, mas é mais usual você ir a São Luís, né? Então, as comunidades, muitas delas se fecharam, né? Então, proibiram visitas, diminuíram o trânsito de pessoas para evitar que a pandemia se expandisse, né? Mas era um momento para se preocupar com a vida, e eu penso que o que mais afetou as pessoas foi a Resolução 11, que dizia que o Estado brasileiro ia deslocar as pessoas compulsoriamente em pleno período de pandemia. Isso afetou muito mais as pessoas, porque da pandemia você tem alguns mecanismos para se proteger do governo do Brasil, é quase impossível esse tipo de atitude. Quanto às iniciativas do Legislativo, tanto os deputados e os senadores de direita e de esquerda do Brasil, com exceção do PSOL, foi voto massivo a favor da ST, porque a ST teve que passar pelo Congresso. Foi o mesmo processo que aconteceu em 2000, que o Jair Bolsonaro foi um dos defensores de que não se aprovasse porque feria a soberania nacional, que era o argumento, né? Mas nem mesmo que nós temos um governo do estado do Maranhão, que é um governo que se diz de esquerda, que se diz comunista, mas o governador Flávio Dino estava completamente alinhado ao Bolsonaro para a aprovação do AST. O Maranhão tem 18 deputados estaduais e 3 senadores da República. Dos 18, 16 votaram a favor, um se absteve e um votou contra. Os 3 senadores foram unânimes em votar a favor da ST. Então, o contexto político, para nós, foi extremamente desfavorável. Nós nem sequer conseguimos a agenda com os deputados, senadores, com o governador, para discutir essas questões, porque a nossa intenção era fazer disso um debate mais amplo, porque esse tipo de decisão não pode ser tomada por meia dúzia de político descomprometido. Então, e outra coisa muito séria, o Xavier já falou, não tem transferência de tecnologia, e o Estado brasileiro, com esse dinheiro que arrecada, ele não pode investir em tecnologia para desenvolvimento de tecnologia espacial. Então, a ideia, basicamente, dos políticos brasileiros estão de olho em quanto isso pode gerar de renda, porque tem uma distribuição de royalties entre os estados, entre algumas universidades e a prefeitura, mas não se discute nenhuma possibilidade de compensação econômica para as comunidades quilombolas nesse projeto. Quando se fala de royalties para as comunidades, a discussão não caminha. Então, o ônus, o prejuízo fica com as comunidades e o dinheiro fica para os políticos brasileiros, dessa dinâmica de como opera o sentido da corrupção no Estado brasileiro.
Before going on to Juliana, I would just like to ask Davi, can you tell us a bit how people who are listening today can connect with the Quilombola movement and the organized groups that you have mentioned?
A gente pode se conectar pelo o Instagram do Movimentos Atingidos pela Base, pelo Facebook, pelo Twitter também do Movimentos Atingidos pela Base, e também tem um endereço de e-mail que eu posso colocar aqui para disponibilizar.
Yes, if you can put it in the chat, and then we'll also tweet it out.
Ok.
Thanks. Great. So, Juliana, if you want to add to any of those questions, and then we got a new question that came in as to what is the U.S. actually getting from this? Let me know what you think of that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Sean would know more in detail, but as far as I've been reading and hearing about, it's they would save about 30% of fuel because of the location of the space base, as it's much closer to the equator and all that. I don't know much what else. It could be like as in the short run as a benefit, and I know that it's quick money, like it was mentioned, to the current people in power in Brazil. And what we're seeing more and more as we talk here is that the need for international solidarity has never been so important, because for what Davi has shared, it's not like, you can reach out to Supreme Court or you can reach out to public prosecutors, because they're all together in a plan to dismantle the rights protected by the Constitution. So what we see is that this huge need to be aligned. And in terms of what the US would benefit from this deal, to me, I am still curious to know, what Sean could share, aside from these 30% of savings, and also expanding their power on land in Latin America, and space and influence. So I would like Sean to comment that as well.
Okay, so Professor Mitchell, do you have any more insight as to what why the US is so interested in this and what they would gain from it at this point? I know he's having some issues with his computer, so I'm not sure. He's frozen now. Okay, well, hopefully we'll get him back in a second. How about we basically go to okay, Professor Mitchell, can you hear us? I don't think he can hear us. Okay, if you can, okay. I guess one final quick question for everyone is what needs to be done, and do you think that the situation could change should there be a Biden presidency? So, Davi first.
Sean, can you hear us? If you could comment on that, and also on what the US would benefit from this deal.
I heard that. I was hearing intermittently. I'm not sure if you're all able to hear me. You're kind of freezing. Somehow my internet seems to be working such that people can hear me, but I can't hear others. But the Zoom kicked me out and then brought me back in again with my spotty internet. So in terms of what the US will gain, I mean, it's really, really complicated. Obviously, space is a domain. It's all dual use technology, right? So there's always a kind of military civilian side. The civilian side gets talked about more, but the military side is there. As you said, Juliana, there, in terms of strict satellite launching, which is very, very lucrative, yeah, you save something like 30% in fuel costs launching from a equatorial site like Alcântara. So it's potentially a very lucrative place. There are also, and I don't pretend to kind of know everything that's going on, but there is very complicated kind of geopolitical things going on. I mean, Brazil's main partner in space activities over the last few decades has been China. And so, there's this other kind of geostrategic element to try to kind of bring Brazil into the US sphere in terms of space development, and away from the kind of more independent foreign policy and technology policy that Brazil had, under the PT administrations. So there's a lot of that in the background, which of course is a bit hard to sort out because people don't talk about it much. But at minimally, there are those commercial interests that you mentioned, Juliana, about fuel costs.
Before I go to Davi and Juliana, do you have any comments about how you think things might be different under Biden?
To be honest, moving from the Alcântara side, but also going to the 20 billion help to protect the Amazon that he has talked about. I think we should all be wary what it could mean to both sustainable development, to Brazil's sovereignty, and of course, I think it could be better and easier for us to push for this to be more sustainable or just not to happen if we're able to. And I believe it would be much easier for us to demand protection for the Quilombola communities there. But I do think that it wouldn't change completely as what we have right now. And I think like the same would go to, 2 years from now if Bolsonaro is not in power anymore. So I think in terms of foreign policy, we should be happy, and what if a Biden presidency comes to place, and how that could trickle down into Brazil politics and many other parts of the world. But in terms of this in particular, it could be easier, but we should keep our eyes alert. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'd like to give the closing words to Davi in terms of anything you want us to know or add, as well as any comments you might have about potentially there being a Biden for president and whether that would make any difference.
Uma possibilidade de uma futura eleição do Biden é diminuir a influência do atual presidente brasileiro. Eu penso que ele vai se enfraquecer porque é aonde ele conta com todo o poder dele, né? Então, tanto é que ele faz qualquer coisa, por mais estúpida que seja, para estar alinhado ao presidente americano. Então, esse é o braço forte. Se quebra isso, ele vai ficar muito isolado, né? Consequentemente, o país vai ficar muito isolado. Ou então ele vai ter que mudar de posição, porque mudar de posição para ele também não é muito problema. Agora, o que a gente precisa, eu penso que é fundamental a gente fazer pressão aí dos Estados Unidos, pressionar os senadores, porque nos Estados Unidos você tem mecanismos mais eficientes de pressão do que aqui nós temos, porque aqui isso não funciona, a pressão não funciona muito sobre os políticos brasileiros, porque você não tem muito esses instrumentos. Mas a ideia é que encontrar um jeito da solidariedade, criar uma solidariedade a essa causa nos Estados Unidos. Isso já teve antes, nos anos 2000, quando Fernando Henrique tentou passar esse mesmo acordo. Então, foi muito por pressão da sociedade americana e pressão da sociedade brasileira que o acordo não foi firmado. Mas já com o acordo firmado, é fundamental pressão da sociedade americana nos Estados Unidos sobre essa questão. Porque os políticos brasileiros eles não estão preocupados com isso. Mas eles estão reagindo, inclusive, de forma muito deselegante à carta, à emenda da Debbie Haaland, dos congressistas americanos. Eles estão reagindo de forma muito deselegante, inclusive. Então, é sinal que esse tipo de pressão funciona. E se a gente fizer pressão daí, porque a gente tem que deixar algo bem definido. Hoje, as comunidades, se o Estado brasileiro fizer um acordo dentro dos 8.000, isso é a relação do Estado brasileiro, pode ser, como o Xan até falou, perfeitamente pode ser feito lá, os acordos que o Estado brasileiro quer. Não tem necessidade, a gente não admite que isso incida sobre a vida de 800 famílias. Estão falando aí de quase de 3 a 4 mil pessoas que vão ter sua vida impactada com um empreendimento que, a priori, é um acordo de ciência e tecnologia. Mas eu acho que isso é uma porta aberta para a gente ter uma Guantánamo em Alcântara. É uma porta aberta pela importância geopolítica de Alcântara. Então, pela localização geopolítica, é uma porta aberta para uma base militar. Então, a porta, a chave dessa porta se chama Acordo de Salvaguarda Tecnológico.
Well, that's thank you so much, Davi, for your final comments. I want to thank Professor Mitchell. I want to thank Juliana. I want to thank U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil for the opportunity to have this event today. I just want to remind everyone that this is not a done deal. We can still act. and that if we get ourselves organized and together, we can definitely make a dent in this and make enough noise so that it doesn't happen. At this particular time in our history, we're in the United States, we have been seeing so many protests that have opened up questions about racism, legacy of racism. It's also very important that we don't forget that in this hemisphere, and especially in the Americas, those histories have also have a long way to go, and that there's a lot of reckoning needs to be done. And we certainly don't want to be in any way facilitating any of the consolidation of that terrible history. Um, the US and Brazil did sign a racial action plan. And this is something that I think we should also look at as a possibility, as a way to build support for the situation of the Quilombola communities. But any event, we will be continuing to work on these issues. So Davi, please tell your networks that they can count certainly on WOLA and on us here today. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you have a very good day. Thank you.